Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Module 8 of our course in Foreign Language Teaching Methodology, part of the Southeast European University's online Masters in English Language Teaching. Today we're going to begin talking a little more specifically about what makes a good teacher. Now there's a lot of opinions about this. I'm sure you have your own, and I think probably you have role models you've had in the past and probably still have, what you think is a good teacher and what you also think is a bad teacher. Well, people have looked at this and to try to find specific descriptions of what makes a good teacher. And I've chosen one, and it's an article that I'll be sending to you. The first component that this person looks at, this is a woman named Thompson, and she's written a very short article, but done extensive research for her PhD in Australia, I believe. And she divides good teaching into two basic categories. One is the mental component, or the person's personal characteristics, and the other is, which we'll get to in a moment, is the mechanical component, which are classroom management skills. First of all, the mental component, just to briefly summarize, since you will be doing the reading yourselves, is to have good rapport with students. Rapport, as you know, is a French word, which means good relationships, good communication, friendly and supportive relationship with students. Shows patience, is respectful, well-planned and organized, creative, and appears knowledgeable about methods and language. Though it's not always easy to see if someone's knowledgeable about methods, it's certainly to have some command of what you're doing and to be able to speak freely about methods, and as well as know your subject, know the language that you're teaching, are strong characteristics to have and recognizable in good teachers. Anyway, this is the results of her research, and this is, maybe it's not exhaustive, perhaps you have some things to add, but this is what she came up with as the most important personal characteristics a teacher can have. On to the mechanical component. These are classroom management skills. First of all, you have giving clear instructions and checking understanding, using effective and appropriate error correction technique and providing feedback, monitoring student activity effectively, and paces activities well and maintains interest. Pacing refers to, if you don't already know, how fast you do something and how much time you spend on each part, and if you rush through things or if you drag. So pacing basically is doing it at the right speed so students can follow, so students can remain engaged without becoming too bored. Basically, it's the pacing of the lesson is how you run the rhythm of your lesson, how quickly you move through things without rushing. Now, other readings you have for this unit, for this module, there are a couple of different readings. One is about mistakes and error correction, and the other is about grouping students. We'll briefly summarize some of the main points of these readings now. First of all, mistakes are something that I think we all know as language teachers are a very important part of learning. They're not simply something that is to be avoided, but something that is to be utilized. So we know students make mistakes, and most of us tell our students to feel free to make mistakes and not to become too self-conscious when they make mistakes. But of course, we don't want them to make too many. And when they do make them, we want to give them the kind of feedback, the kind of response that will help them to use the mistakes to learn the language and not make them in the future. So we first of all ask why students make mistakes. You recall the concept of interlanguage that we talked about in previous modules. The idea that what comes out of a student's mouth is evidence of what is going on inside their head. But the language learning taking place in the head is something that's in constant flux between knowing and not knowing, between trying and relearning, and so the mistakes they make are evidence of activity, not evidence of misunderstanding necessarily, but evidence of trying to figure things out. So it's important we understand why students make mistakes. The next thing is, how do different kinds of mistakes reflect student understanding of the target language? Again, the interlanguage. So if a student, the very basic example is with past tense verbs. If a student uses a regular verb with a past tense ed and pronounces it correctly, that's great. Of course, they might pronounce it incorrectly. And then that reflects a misunderstanding of pronunciation. However, if a student takes a verb, an irregular verb, and puts it in the past tense in a regular way, for example, go becomes goed, break becomes braked instead of broke, then is evidence that the student is applying a rule. So it's evidence of not only misunderstanding, it's not just a mistake, it's also evidence of an understanding of a rule. They're just being applied in places where it should not be applied. How do teachers respond to, evaluate, assess, and correct these mistakes? This is a key question. How we respond to the mistakes will help in a lot of ways. Obviously, students we want them to feel free. We don't want to inhibit them too much, so we can't correct everything constantly. However, sometimes we need to correct. And then how do we correct? How do we respond to the mistakes? How can students be encouraged to assess themselves? Interesting question. How can students be encouraged to see what they're doing and to evaluate it, rather than just waiting for us to do the evaluation? This goes back to the question which we're talking about now and again in future modules of learner autonomy, learners taking control of their learning. Now, feedback. Obviously, if a student makes a mistake, if a student doesn't make a mistake but makes some kind of statement, they expect some response from us, the teacher. This is the feedback we give them. And so feedback is the response in some way to something they've done or have not done in the classroom. So what is a good general approach to giving feedback? These are questions that hopefully through the reading we'll be able to answer. How do we give feedback during fluency work? How do we give feedback during accuracy work? Generally, I think most people would say that when students are speaking fluently, and we want them to be fluent, we don't want to interrupt them too much. But we need to give them some kind of feedback, don't we? And then during accuracy work, perhaps you want to be a little more attentive, a little more, perhaps you might interrupt more because students are focused on being accurate, not focused on just getting a message across and being fluent. So it's important to know these two events, and how do we give feedback during these moments in the lesson when we're focusing on either fluency or accuracy. And also process versus product. What are the best techniques to apply when giving feedback during written work? Pair and group work. The third reading you'll have for this module is on grouping students, putting them into pairs and groups. And the question is, when is it better to use a whole class instruction, teaching all the students at once? When is it better to use pair and group work? And what are the drawbacks of working as a whole class? What are the drawbacks of working in groups? And how can these drawbacks be overcome? I know in my experience, very often people will say, oh, you're doing group work, that's good, because that means students are talking to each other. But also in my experience, when I put students into groups, I've often had frustration because they talk to each other in their native language, perhaps, or you have a situation where maybe in a group of 3 or 4, one or two students are doing all the work, and maybe 1 or 2 students are doing little to nothing. So these are things to overcome, and this reading that I've assigned and will be sending to you, dealing with pair and group work, will look at these issues and how to overcome them in your classes. Now, in the next few modules, we'll be observing teaching. And the way we'll do this is I've put some videos online, and you'll be able to access them. They're shortish videos. They're about half of a 45-minute lesson, so 20-25 minutes each. And we'll do one over each of the next 3 modules. And what I'd like you to do, and I'll tell you specifically for each one what I'd like you to do, but we'll be observing the teachers and what they're doing. And the reason why I assigned these 2 readings, one on giving error correction and feedback, and the other on grouping students, is because you'll see these happening in these lessons. Now they're small group lessons, so perhaps they will be not so applicable to your teaching situations, but I think that the behavior of the teacher and the way the teacher interacts with the student, individually or as a group, can be very useful. Now, one thing about observing is that it's not always the case when you observe a good teacher, you learn a lot, and when you observe a bad teacher, you learn nothing. In fact, by observing someone who's making mistakes in the classroom or not doing well, you also learn. So when we observe teaching, you don't just necessarily assume you want to observe the best. And the videos that I've posted, I think you'll find perhaps the teachers are good, but you'll find things about them, or things about their style, or the way they decide to run certain activities that you might do differently, and you might have reasons for that, which is a very good thing. You should be critical when you watch. Not overly critical. You should understand that teaching is not something that's done by machines, done by people, and every situation is a very real one, and you can't plan for everything. But so be positive, but at the same time, be constructively critical about what you see. And don't always assume, because I, for example, posted a video on the internet, that this is a model teacher. I think there are plenty of model teachers, but no one's perfect. So I've chosen a few videos. I think the teachers are good, but how good they are is for you to decide, because everyone has a different opinion of what good is. Anyway, why do we observe? I think, well, the first thing is that seeing is believing. You can talk about something, but when you actually see it done, you can see whether it works or not. Next is talking about something is not the same as doing it. So we know as teachers, if you prepare for a class, and you have an idea what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and they walk into that classroom, it might not come out the way you want it to, simply because it's not always possible to know what's going to happen. How are students going to respond, and how are you going to feel at the moment? What's going to happen? Maybe it's raining that day. Maybe the electricity goes out. Maybe a couple of your best students are sick that day. Maybe students come in late. Maybe they haven't done their homework. There are a lot of things that you can't prepare for always consistently. And that's because teachers and students are people. So it's fine to read books, it's fine to discuss things, but when you actually see what people are doing as people, you learn much more. Because it's a chance to see mistakes and successes. As I mentioned, when you observe, it's good to be critical, to see things that could be improved, but it's also very good to see things that work well. And reacting to the moment, because this is the real key to teaching, I think, and it's being able to react to the moment, which means being sensitive. Obviously, preparation is very, very important, but being able to react in the classroom, in the moment, to changing situations and to individual students and their learning is key to good teaching. So that's why we're observing. We're trying to see teachers trying to be good teachers, and we learn about them. I also think it's a very good way to evaluate teachers' progress as they develop as a teacher. So what I've done for this observation, and for the observations you'll be doing, is I've prepared an observation checklist. And this is an image of that checklist. As you'll see, you might recognize the mental component and the mechanical component. What I've done is I've taken each aspect of these components and I've listed them as one item for observation. So if you first of all, look at the top of the screen, and you'll see the key. Basically 1 to 5 on the Likert scale. 1 being poor, 5 being excellent, 3 being generally good, 2 not so good, and 4 very good. And then you look down, you'll see the item here has good rapport with students. So what I want you to do as you're watching is to think about these aspects. Does the teacher have good rapport with his or her students? And then evaluate that between poor and excellent. And then defend that. So anytime, obviously it's good to have a feeling. If you have a reaction, you say, I don't think the rapport is good. Maybe it's good with some students, maybe not other students. So maybe it's not excellent, maybe it's very good, maybe it's generally good. But you should know why you think that. So try to be concrete. Try to think of examples of why. Now I've taken another example from the mechanical component. It gives clear instructions and checks understanding. So obviously, I think that's fairly clear. If his teacher gives clear instructions of what the students are supposed to do, and then before he has the students start working, he checks to see if anyone has any questions. Maybe he does this by saying, do you have questions? The students say yes or no. Maybe he does it in other ways. Maybe he or she asks the students to repeat what they're supposed to do. In other ways of getting feedback on instructions, checking understanding. Okay, that's all for this module's presentation. I'll be sending you the readings, along with a link to this video, and also a link to the video of the classroom, the lesson, the short lesson. It's about half a lesson you'll be watching for this module. I wish you all the best, good luck, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye for now.